So welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had an enjoyable lunch. And we're ready for the next session. And it's titled Energy Exports, the Potential for Growth, which has definitely been a hot topic in the news. Let me just kind of set the stage here, and then I will introduce the first of our panelists, and we'll get talking. So a few years back, a Texas pioneer that I think some of you in this room know, named George Mitchell, a son of Greek immigrants, discovered over the course of more than 2 decades how to combine horizontal drilling with hydraulic fracturing and to capture natural gas efficiently from shale formations. And new technology has helped extract oil as well that was inaccessible a short time ago, or uneconomic a short time ago. George Mitchell died last month at the age of 94. But the effects of this amazing technological innovation have been felt over the last few years. We've heard a lot of statistics today, and I'm not going to bore you with more, but just one of them, from 2008 to 2012, domestic natural gas production rose 20% and crude oil production 30%. And those projections just keep rising and rising. Now, the vast majority of this energy bonanza is being consumed at home, but some of it is ripe for export, if, that is, the government allows it. What we're seeing, however, is that the Energy Department is now getting quite active in approvals for exports of natural gas. And just yesterday, the Energy Department gave approval, and it's conditional approval because there are other approvals that are necessary, but now to the 4th liquefied natural gas terminal in the United States, this one, Cove Point, that's in Maryland. And it's actually the 3rd approval. It's the 4th approval in all, but the 3rd in the last 4 months. Now, it wasn't too many years ago that Alan Greenspan and others were extremely worried that the United States was running out of natural gas and that it was necessary to import the gas to the United States. Now we're in the opposite situation, where we are trying to export natural gas, but there are some obstacles, and they are regulatory obstacles. The Energy Department, I just wanted to let you hear this quote. The Energy Department said back in May that it was going to make case-by-case reviews of the applications of LNG terminals to export, quote, to assess market impacts of each export decision to ensure American consumers are not harmed by large-scale exports. And this fear of exports may sound kind of curious. I mean, you would think that Adam Smith settled the export question more than 200 years ago when he showed that everyone gains through trade with low-cost producers. And there's even kind of a moral case that you can make, which is that the sweat of my brow, the fruit of my labor ought to be something that I can transfer to anybody I want, whether that person's down the street in this room or at the other end of the world, unless they're really good national security objections. But at any rate, the U.S. government has a freeze on natural gas exports to countries that don't have a free trade agreement, an FTA, with the United States, and that includes major markets that really want natural gas, like Japan, China, India, much of Europe. And there's also a 37-year-old ban on exporting nearly all crude oil as well. Not all, but. So exporting natural gas is not cheap. You've got to take the natural gas, convert it into a liquid, put it on a ship, take it somewhere else where it gets converted back from a liquid into a gas. But the price difference between domestic natural gas here in the United States and natural gas around the world is quite large, and it can accommodate the extra costs of shipping it. So that kind of sets the stage. And I do want to say that I don't want to be glib about exports. I mean, there are good arguments against exporting natural gas or constraining exports in some way. I mean, after all, isn't energy a valuable natural resource? I mean, why sell it to China, or why sell it to other countries? We need it at home. Why not? Why shouldn't we keep it at home for our own energy independence? There are other arguments as well, and we're going to hear them today. And so I want to turn first to Ron Kirk. Ron Kirk is currently Senior of Counsel at Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. He has had a distinguished and varied career in public service. He was, as I'm sure most of the people in this room know, Mayor of Dallas from 1995 to 2001. He was also Secretary of State of the state of Texas, and he served as well as U.S. Trade Representative. So I just wanted to begin by asking Ambassador Kirk, you know trade, so why is it so difficult to export oil and gas as compared to other kinds of goods?
Well, part of that answer is historic, and that Congress at some point made a judgment that they felt differently about this particular commodity than others. But I think we are entering a period of time that for strategic reasons and others, there's more excitement, more interest around this issue of how we can appropriately balance the benefits of increased consumption and production and energy independence at home, as well as reducing our cost, as well as following the spirit of the model that you spoke to of allowing someone to sell that commodity anywhere they want to go. Now, as a trade guy, I don't have but one answer, and I happen to blame, not just because I have that job, being privileged to be mayor of Dallas in a state that is the leading export state in the country, and by a wide margin, most of us get the benefits of trade. And I would say that with the aggressive posture that we are in as a country right now in terms of seeking trade agreements potentially for the first time with the European Union and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you would hit many of those economies that you mentioned that are not covered by a trade agreement. But you'll hear from others on the panel that there are others that believe this puts the U.S. for the first time at an extraordinary competitive advantage in terms of lowering our manufacturing costs. It was my job as U.S. Trade Rep, and understand I am wholly separate from the decision-making posture at the Department of Energy, and others have to go through. But it is our job as the trade rep to raise my hand and remind them that I pretty much went on TV and bragged about the fact that I sued China and other countries for restricting precious materials that we needed to grow our economy. So it was kind of one of those, I'm not telling you not to do it, but that as a member of the World Trade Organization, we have to be responsible. But maybe to make this a little more colloquial, as my father would say, this is a pretty high-class problem to have. I like being where we are. And I don't want to make light of this because we are the day after September 11th, and we are in the middle of a tortured decision about what the appropriate role to take is in Syria. But I can say the United States achieving less reliance on foreign governments for our energy needs and being in the posture to export around the world has consequences and benefits far beyond manufacturing and production. The leverage it gives us strategically, I think, is just as valuable as well.
It was a good measured answer. And I just want to make
well, I'm sitting in the middle.
You
so
didn't. That's why you're. That's
the centrist that I.
Why you're sitting there. So I just want to make clear. You when you were USTR, you didn't have to deal. First of all, as you say, it's the Energy Department's decision, and there are other regulatory agencies, but not USTR. But at that time, we were not even thinking about exporting natural gas, or were we?
Well, we were. I think one of the first permit was approved, I think, about 18 months ago. And I have to be careful, but we were very vocal about the fact that at the same time, and it wasn't just within the administration, and I don't want to take away from other panelists, you did have other voices that believe, man, this is a huge competitive opportunity for the U.S. Why should we be supplying our competitors? But it was my job and my responsibility to remind them that when China, for example, restricted raw materials that you can't get anywhere but China, that you have to make everything from steel to coke, to metal supplies and other rare earth materials, we took them to the WTO and held them accountable and said, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. You covenanted not to do that. And we don't want to be in the awkward position of the United States telling the rest of the world, you can't do that. But at the same time, we're going to act solely from mercantilist passion and try to restrict these materials. But I think the appropriate balance is going to be struck. And I like the opportunity that we have before us as a country. Because one, I am a free trader, and I can tell you, we see the world very differently here in Dallas than the rest of the world. And many of you know me and know I'm not classically trained in trade. And when I went through confirmation, one of the senators asked me, what do you think helps you in this job? And I said, well, my wife, because she's from Cleveland and Detroit. And so for 25 years, I have seen trade through the lens of people in the rest of the world that don't want us involved in any free trade at all. And when you ask them why, their biggest anxiety is they say, we have this huge trade deficit and everybody else is taking advantage of it. Half of that is related to us importing oil and crude from other parts in the world. So the part of me that says the sooner we can take that off the table, the more aggressive we can be as a country in having a thoughtful trade policy that lets us take advantage of all these new consumers that are coming of age around the world.
Thank you. Kelsey Warren, you are chairman and CEO of Energy Transfer Partners, and you just, 5 weeks ago or so, had the Lake Charles LNG export terminal receive its first approval from the Energy Department. I think the audience would be interested in knowing what it was like to go through that part of the permitting process. You still have some ways to go.
Yes, well, we received that permit through an acquisition. We bought a company that was already in the import business of natural gas, and of course we know the story on that. As you said, very little natural gas has ever been imported into this country through LNG. But we bought the company, and they had already filed a permit with the DOE. So we simply saw the process through. We're very pleased. It should be a very good facility for us, but now we're in the next step, which is to receive the FERC permit, which will take much longer. There's a lot of engineering, environmental assessment yet to be done, all of which should be done. So at best, our facility will probably not start operating until 2018.
And how much natural gas will your facility export, and where will it go?
At our peak, we should be exporting about 4.5 billion cubic feet per day. Where it will go is probably British Gas, the only customer. Now, British Gas may broker it. They very likely will broker it to Asia or other countries that are paying the higher price. But it will be an enormous volume. And I think that's another thing people underestimate. We've been exporting natural gas from this country for a long time. It's just Mexico and Canada.
By pipeline.
By pipeline, exactly. Believe me, if it was economically justifiable to build a pipeline across the ocean, we would be doing it. But that's so far we have not figured that out. That would be difficult. So just the sheer volume. If you look at 4.5 billion cubic feet per day, the average person doesn't know how much that is. That takes a lot of diameter in pipelines just to achieve that. So, but when we're fully operational, that will be our peak volume. Let me also say this.
Yeah.
Jim, I don't expect a lot of natural gas to move from this country. I really don't. I don't expect LNG to move. Scott Sheffield, the reason we have this problem today is because gas prices got up above $6-7 and stayed there for about 6 to 8 years. Had they not done that, and these guys glutted the heck out of the market. You mentioned George Mitchell. George, what a great man. And one thing George Mitchell said in a speech I listened to that was pretty amazing. He said, you know, everybody gives me credit for the science of discovering the slick water frac, which I don't know if everybody in this room knows, but that was one of the things that helped produce natural gas in commercial quantities from shales. Is he said he was trying to find ways to reduce his completion cost. It was driven by economics.
Right.
I mean, so I think this market's so efficient in the United States, I believe that when we see any meaningful quantities of natural gas leave this country, you'll see prices adjust, and you'll see the drill bit correct. And if this man can drill an oil well or a saturated with liquid well, he's drilling it. He is not drilling a gas well today, I'll promise you that.
Prices adjust, meaning prices will rise domestically.
They will rise. But the market clearing price, I'm sorry, you didn't ask this. The market clearing price, if you get about $7 per MMBTU today, BG's not going to take gas from the United States. They're going to go somewhere else. It's cheaper. And that's where everybody's so fearful of this, and this is really good for the market.
Okay, so Paul Ciccio, you have a slightly different point of view. You're the president of Industrial Energy Consumers of America, and you were before that an executive of Dow Chemical. And Dow Chemical, Mr. Andrew Liveris has been very vocal in his opposition to unconstrained, let's put it that way, natural gas exports. Why do you think what is your case for limiting the exports of natural gas? Why shouldn't trade be free?
Well, our position as an organization is not specifically to limit LNG. There's a right way to make decisions regarding exports and a wrong way. And what we see is happening is the wrong way. By the way, I want to make sure the audience knows that we are a free trader. There is no sector of the economy that better understands global competition than the manufacturing sector. And given a level playing field, I don't think any country, any company from another country is going to beat U.S. manufacturing if we have a level playing field. And partly about this LNG issue is about a level playing field. On that point, the way that it works is that the Department of Energy gets to decide whether or not it approves shipments to non-free trade. Free trade countries automatically get approved.
Right, and there are, what, about 20 of those, right?
I think that's right.
Right now. Yeah. But we're trying to negotiate a free trade deal with Europe.
But most of the LNG consuming countries are non-free trade. And so one of the points that we make that's an important public policy aspect is that shipping LNG to countries that do not have free trade agreements with the United States undermines our ability, the manufacturer's ability to get a level playing field, to be able to ship our products into that country.
Right.
Why would you negotiate to try to get a level playing field, a free trade agreement, and give the thing that that country wants and not get anything in return?
So you're saying you would be losing your leverage, right?
Yeah, sure. But there's another important issue at hand, and that is that the Department of Energy is making decisions on approving these export terminals using poor data. Again, it's a public policy issue. The decision yesterday to approve Dominion, they assumed domestic natural gas consumption at a rate that we thought was 3 years ago. They assumed flat domestic demand between now and 2020. Everybody in this room knows that demand over the period of 2015, 16, 17, we expect demand to increase by 40%. So they are making decisions based on bad domestic demand assumptions.
You know, there was this a study, which I think all energy wonks know about, that NERA Economic Consulting did for the Energy Department, right, that said about price, looked at the question of prices, how much are prices going to rise in the United States if supply declines because we're shipping abroad. So across all these scenarios, the study found the U.S. was projected to gain net economic benefits from allowing LNG exports. So you disagree with that?
Well, it all depends on what is a meaningful net economic benefit. If you think $5 billion net benefit is a big deal for this country in 2015, or maybe even $20 billion of net benefit in 2020, if you think that's a big deal, then that's a good study. But $20 billion net benefit is about 6 hours of work in the United States when you've got a $16 trillion economy. It's peanuts.
Okay, we'll start mixing it up later, but you're trying to deny Kelsey Warren a living here. because you probably don't want him. So, but you would.
There's a right way and a wrong way.
So, but you don't think he should have gotten his permit?
I think maybe he should get his permit. But you see, this is not a short-term issue. This is a long-term issue. When you make decisions to approve a terminal, you are giving an agreement for 20 to 30 years. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of things can happen in 20 to 30 years that negatively impact supply or significantly increase demand in the United States that changes the entire supply-demand price equation on that decision. So that is at the heart of the issue.
Okay, I'm going to bring Robbie into this, and then Scott. But Robbie, okay, so you got to come at this from a slightly different point of view. I was just saying to Robbie that when we first did an energy conference here at the Bush Center, many of you were there 3.5 years ago. One of the three areas that we looked at was environment, economy, and national security. And I know you're concerned about national security, and that's linked to the economy. But so we thought it would be interesting to have you on the panel. So what are the national security implications of increasing exports of energy, of natural gas and oil?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to do is to, first of all, distinguish between natural gas and oil, which we don't do very well in this country, and our policymakers don't do. So the question on natural gas is very distinct from oil, because oil is already a global market, and the price is being determined on a global market, where natural gas is currently sort of a regional market, a North American regional market, at least here. And so you have different questions, and I think the question on natural gas, to me, is a fairly clear question, and you're going to come out where you believe we should be, based on your probably ideology or whatever it is. And that's a question of free trade, sort of what the Mayor Kirk was saying. That's our value as a country. We go around the world telling everyone that it's better to be a free trading nation. We can't go to China and tell them to export their rare earth metals and all these things. We believe in Adam Smith, and that that everyone should produce what they produce most efficiently, and somehow that system all works.
But I want to stick up for Paul for a second, because he's saying that we don't have free trade, and that we can use this as leverage to get free trade.
But ultimately, should we export natural gas, whether it be to which countries? The answer is, do you believe in that, or versus people? And I think it's likely. We don't know the answer to this. Will there be more volatility in the market because there'll be a more global market? Will there be prices will come down in the world, prices might go up a little bit here? That's all possible. Now, I personally come down on the favor of exporting, because I think, how do you go to your allies? How do you go to all these other countries and do the diplomacy that we need and have a global system? But we have to understand that there could be some consequences. But that's natural gas, and I think the oil question is almost more important, because we still have a tremendous amount of dependence. And in fact, we've totally misdiagnosed this problem, and it's sort of a scary moment, because probably we will become, every president since President Eisenhower said we need to end our dependence on foreign oil. And that sounds wonderful. But if that's the diagnosis of your problem, we actually won't solve our problems, because we will end our dependence on foreign oil likely. But then the question is, what does that do to our economy? So there's a global market. We're already exporting oil, so first of all. So the question is should we be allowed to export oil? The answer is we should. We're already doing it. But unfortunately, because of the regulations, our exporters or our refineries have to manipulate it a little bit and turn it into some refined product. They have to add some liquids into it so it doesn't called crude. So let's admit what it is. It just doesn't sound good politically to say that we should import what we need, put it into the right refineries, and keep it most efficiently, and we should export to refineries around the world that could use our light sweet crude a little better. But then there's this issue of imports and exports, and I think there's a global market, and the question of oil dependence is how important is oil to your economy? And the truth is that drilling more is a very important thing. Every well we drill, every barrel we produce in this country means we're sending less money overseas, we're creating jobs in this country. The macroeconomic benefits are clear. But then, are they solving the national security issues? And I would posit that, energy independence is a total myth when you have a global market. So anything happens in the world, the price goes up. And we pay as consumers. When you have a consumer-driven economy, because this conference is about growth, if you have a consumer-driven economy, if people are paying more for gasoline, They're buying one less television, they're taking one less trip, they're going out to the restaurant one less time. It's amazing that this year we've spent more on oil in the history of the United States, although we're producing more domestically than we have in 2.5 decades.
So your conclusion is we should limit our exports of oil?
No, we should allow all exports. My conclusion is this: this country has to get off this tastes great, less filling attitude between Republicans and Democrats, where one says we should drill, baby, drill, and the other says we need government to mandate alternative vehicles. And the truth is we should be doing a bunch of things. We should allow total production in this country and maximize domestic production, understanding that and export that production, understanding that what that does is helps our balance of trade, helps create jobs, puts the country in a much better financial position. And at the same time, we should make oil less important in our economy, as Ambassador Gray was saying. The problem with oil is there's a monopoly of oil on our transportation system. And as the price goes up because of events in Syria or events in Libya, or, by the way, not a free market because OPEC is a cartel and making decisions that are very non-free market. You talk about regulatory non-free market action, are changing the price. And so what we need to do there is make oil less important per dollar of GDP through efficiency, as well as drive other and level the playing field for all other types of fuel sources into the transport sector so that we're no longer dependent on one commodity. And that's where President Bush, bring it back to the library, was, talk about making a policy. He passed the first fuel economy standards in 30 years, making them much more free market oriented and much more fair. But that was a huge deal. We're going to be saving so much more in our transportation sector due to that. So I think we need to be doing all of it. And I would say that the response to your question is it's got to be drill, baby, drill plus. We need to diagnose our problem correctly, which is not just foreign oil, and we then can get the right solution, which means, I guess, all the above, as our political establishment likes to say.
Okay, thanks. I forgot to introduce you. So, so Robbie Diamond is the head of Securing America's Future Energy, or SAFE, which he set up with Fred Smith of FedEx and Marine General P.X. Kelly to combat, as you heard, America's dependence on foreign oil. And actually, it's a good segue to Scott Sheffield, who is the CEO of Pioneer Natural Resources, which is a leader in developing liquids in rich shale plays. And you're the third most active operator in the United States, and I would also say the best performing energy stock in the S&P over the last several years. So you're doing something right, or you're doing many things right. And but I thought you would be a good person to talk to about this issue of exporting oil. And we've heard different things about how much constraints there are on exporting oil. Can you explain that and why you think there should be fewer constraints?
Yes,
if you
Jim.
do.
I think I'm glad to hear that. I think we're all five in agreement. It's good to hear that we're all for free trade. So from Robbie and Paul, the more they discussed it, I think we're all for free trade.
Yeah, we all define it differently.
The people have focused on natural gas from George Mitchell and the Barnett Shale. But what's happened in the last 4 years, this country, through, again, horizontal technology, have taken, we have found 3 of the largest fields in the world. The Bakken, the Eagle Ford, and then the Spraberry Wolfcamp field out in the Midland Basin in West Texas. And those 3 fields are over 50 billion in the Spraberry Wolfcamp, 25 billion for the Eagle Ford, and the numbers in the Bakken are between 15 and 20 billion. That's recoverable. It's not all in place. So these are recoverable numbers. And the numbers are going to get larger with time. And I think you heard Ken Hurst say earlier, we've gone from 5 million barrels a day up to 7.5 million barrels a day. The last 4 years, we're adding almost 1 million barrels a day per year. So we're at 7.5. Next year we'll be at 8.5. Then we'll be at 9.5. This year will be the first time at the end of this year we'll actually surpass imports for the first time in a long, long time in this country, which is very, very good. The next thing that's happening is that we're backing out all the sweet crudes in the marketplace in the Gulf Coast. So most of this crude is sweet crude. The refiners in the Gulf Coast, primarily in the Midwest, have built to handle the heavy crudes from Canada. Canada's sending 3 million barrels a day to us now. Saudi Arabia is about 1.3. Mexico is about 1 million. And Venezuela is about 1 million. Canada, what's unique is U.S. is the only large economy, maybe the only country in the world that is restricting exports of crude oil. Only about 50,000 barrels a day, roughly. Most of it's going to Canada. You can do some in the Cook Inlet in Alaska, but we're probably the only country. Canada, what's interesting, is the only country in the world that's only exporting to one country. And they're having trouble doing that, exporting to the U.S. They're trying to find a way to get out through British Columbia and Eastern Canada to circumvent the Keystone issues. So at some point in time, adding 1 million barrels a day, we're going to exceed our refining capacity. We're already at 95% of refining capacity. Nobody's going to build another refinery in this country, in my opinion. And so we're going to exceed the ability to have the products, the crude oil, refined. So we're going to have to export it, and that's going to be needed sometime in the next 2 to 4 years, in my opinion. If you don't, you're going to see Argentina is a great example where you limit exports, try to control prices, have great low prices for the consumer. All of a sudden you wake up, you destroy your oil and gas industry, you're bringing in LNG at $15 an MCF, and you're importing, gone from an exporter to an importer. So it's something that should be the next major topic besides LNG that should be on the table in D.C.
What are the constraints, though, Scott? Just so, I mean, you know, put in simple terms on what you can export. I mean, Robbie just went through a description of how, you know, it has to be certain kinds of refined products. Is that right?
Yes.
It can't be crude?
What's interesting is that most people don't realize we've gone from exporting 1 million barrels a day of products to 3.2 million barrels a day of products. So the refiners are exporting all this crude that's going to the refiners, and as long as you process it somehow with a splitter, what they call a topping plant, if you change the form a little bit of crude, then you can export it. So we're exporting 3.2 million barrels a day. We're going to be exporting probably 6 BCF a day with Kelsey's LNG plants. We're exporting 2 BCF a day to Mexico. That's growing. We're exporting coal. Ambassador Kirk told me the other day in a meeting, we're exporting 1/3 of our agricultural products. So it's important to keep a strong oil and gas industry, in my opinion, to have the ability to be able to export products. The president, anytime he wants to, from national security, can stop it. If he thinks it's a military issue, long-term, he can stop the process.
And so is there a kind of a political battle going on between the refiners and the producers like you? In other words, I would imagine the refiners kind of like this situation.
Yes, that's a good question, Jim. What happened, we had bottlenecks in 2011 and 12. And WTI, which is the benchmark crude in the U.S., West Texas Intermediate, all of a sudden, which was a premium to Brent, which is world pricing, all of a sudden for about 18 months received about $20 average, got as high as 25, less than world prices. It was because of bottlenecks in the Permian Basin, bottlenecks in Cushing. The refiners, what they did, they bought this crude at $20 less, came into the refiners, and they sold to the American consumer world prices. So the refiners, if you owned a refining stock then, the refiner stocks moved up significantly. They had all this profit. And what's happened now, the bottlenecks at Cushing have been solved. The bottlenecks in West Texas are being solved. And so the spread has narrowed back to about $4 to $5. Long term, it's about $6 to $7 between Brent and WTI. So there is a battle, but it's not that much. I think most refiners that I've talked to would like to be able, they're exporting the product. They can't argue against you. They're exporting 3.2 million barrels a day. So how can they argue against exporting oil?
So what do you think about exporting oil? So that doesn't affect chemical manufacturers very much, as far as I know, right? They don't use it for feedstock. They don't use it to run their plants. But that would seem to be just as much leverage as natural gas. Why aren't you against that? Or are you?
Well, we don't have even a position on it. You know, some petrochemical facilities use a crude-based feedstock, but that is on the decline. The rest of the manufacturing sector, primarily, it's just, you know, transportation fuel. So we don't have a view.
But what about this I mean, it seems like your main argument is this kind of leverage argument. And also, I heard Scott mention that we're exporting a third of our agricultural products. Why not use that for leverage? Say, we're going to stop exporting our agricultural products unless we get free trade agreements from everybody.
Well, we have two arguments. One is that the decisions to allow to ship to non-free trade countries is an incredibly important decision, and the Department of Energy doesn't even have, in our view, criteria to decide, to make decisions. And what data they are using is old data on assumptions. So the decision making is not sound.
So here's a good question. How high do you think natural gas prices will get as a result of all this? Now I mean, obviously we don't know how many LNG terms. Let's say that all the current applicants, how many applicants are there now? I've seen 10, and I've also seen 24. I don't know what the number is, Kelsey.
It's higher. It's closer to 24. It's in the high teens.
Okay, so there are 24 applicants. Let's say everybody gets permission, although they clearly won't be exporting as much as the limits that they can have. How high do you think the natural gas price will get in the United States? Because the Energy Department's study doesn't seem to think it's going to go up that much.
No. Well, I can't tell you the answer to that. I do know that if they approved all of those terminals, it would be a demand that would be equivalent to about 47% of existing demand. It's a lot of demand. But we have no idea about price. That's not something we have even thought about.
Kelsey, speaking of this issue of approvals, so what do you think's going on? I mean, all of a sudden, the Energy Department, which has been kind of slow in giving approvals for LNG terminals, has now approved 3 in the last, I don't know, something like 4 months. And do you think there's been a kind of a change in the thinking of the administration, and are we going to see more of these approvals? I mean, in other words, is this issue that we're discussing today really not as cogent as it was a few months ago?
Yes, there has been a change, but the change was simply one of a green light and protocol. So when the Department of Energy came out and said, here is how we're going to stack these proposals, and whether you agree with it or not is in my view is not that relevant. What's important is we received clarity, and so it was an order of the filings. Now, it's illogical that a greenfield LNG facility, even though it may get approved by the DOE, it will not get built. It just will not. You just can't economically build it and compete. You cannot do it.
So a greenfield as opposed to an LNG terminal?
Existing LNG facility that has loading facilities has much of the infrastructure already in place.
It's an import terminal. You get to change it to export.
And you're converting it, and let's call it bidirectional. You're making it bidirectional. So the greenfield projects that are in line, I mean, it's just economics. They just will not. They will not get built. They just will not. And all you got to do is study the fundamental economics. Today, if natural gas, let's say we were able to operate today, and I mentioned this earlier, but it's very important. If we were to be pushing LNG out the door, keep in mind, British Gas already paid us a demand fee to use the facility. We don't care. Whether they move it or not, we're economically indifferent. So they're not going to move it above $7 per MMBTU. In today's market, if you took a snapshot and looked at crude prices and looked at the global LNG market, their spreads are still great, but they're going to buy the raw material somewhere else. They're not going to purchase it there. Now you wonder, well, how can BG pay a demand charge that great and still do this? Because the spreads are ridiculous. They're so, and there's a club. You got to be special to get in the club, the LNG club. We're not in it. We're just a service provider. Mm-hmm. But the British Gases, the Exxon Mobils, the people like that are definitely in the club.
I'm actually going to think of questions because I think we're going to move to the audience for questions in just a second. Someone had a comment?
I was sorry.
Well, I was just going to make one observation in terms of the impact of a decision to export to a non-FTA country, potentially lessening our leverage. The largest commercial relationship that we have in the world and have had is with the European Union. And it's pretty hard to argue that American business is constrained and going there. And that's one case where I don't think our exporting the country within the EU would all impact our leverage there. But the other example to me, the flip side of that argument is just that so much of our manufacturing ability is dependent on our ability to import raw materials and rare earths from China. We do not have a free trade agreement with China, and I don't think anyone would make the case then that China should not provide us materials to which most of the Silicon Valley is dependent, most of our manufacturing industry is dependent. So I don't think that leverage argument, for me, doesn't carry the balance. I'm looking more at the long-term goal. And the mayor in me is just horrified with the notion that we got to wait 20, 30 years to do anything. I mean, if you'd have told me it took 15 blanking years just to build a bridge over the Trinity, I'd have shot myself when I was mayor.
It's a beautiful bridge.
It is a great thing, but my thing is that look, we know these, we've got a wealth of information. The one thing I'm most passionate about going forward, we've got to be able to make fast decisions. I mean, make thoughtful decisions and make them quicker. China's real competitive advantage against the rest of the world, they're the one body that can go in a room and make a decision. We wouldn't want to live under that system. But the biggest thing crippling Europe's economy is they're paralyzed by indecision. We can't have something as important as our energy future be dependent to a 10, 15, 16-year permitting process. We've got to be able to do this in a more thoughtful, efficient manner.
Okay, so I don't want to gang up on Paul, but let me just ask you this question. So if your ex-boss, I don't know if he was your ex-boss or not, but if the CEO of Dow Chemical were here, well, let me put it this way. I think you're being a little bit disingenuous. So if the CEO of Dow Chemical were here, I think he probably would make not the leverage argument, or not just the leverage argument, but he would say, you know, manufacturing is really important in America, and the price of natural gas, it's just the laws of economics are going to push up the price of natural gas. I don't know whether it's going to go to $6 or $7 or whatever it is, if there's a lot of exporting. And that means that our costs are going to go way up, and that means that these preparations that we had earlier made to move our chemical plants to the Middle East, to, you know, Dubai and places like that, that's what we're going to do. And we're not going to build them here. And I think, you know, you didn't make that argument, but I think that's not a bad argument.
There's two arguments. There's the policy arguments that I mentioned, and then there's the economic arguments. And the economic arguments is on the minds of every manufacturer that particularly is energy intensive. And let me talk about that. I represent companies who are in petrochemicals, fertilizer, steel, aluminum, cement. These are 30 to 80% of the cost of making these products is energy. Relatively small changes to the price of energy impacts our competitiveness. Now let's go back to this level playing field issue. You can see where we're coming from. And we want to compete, but a lot of other countries subsidize their manufacturers and make it very difficult. Countries that don't have free trade agreements often discriminate against our products. So where the Dow guy would come from, yes, it's about cost. Now, I love this 4% concept that the center is offering up, because year to date, we have imported $1 trillion of manufactured products into this country. $1 trillion. I would like to use this gas and use this feedstock here in the United States to create a revolution, a renaissance that we haven't seen.
And
That's where he's coming
actually,
from.
of course, this is already happening,
It is
right?
starting.
I mean, tremendous amount of investment is being made as a result of the lower price of natural gas.
It's the only reason that it's happening. And these products are the building block products that are used by the entire rest of the manufacturing. You can't build airplanes and cars without steel and aluminum and chemicals and plastics. You see, we are the engine. And so where Dow comes from it and the rest of the manufacturers, certainly economics are on our mind. When the price of natural gas, well, all studies, the two studies were done, both said the same thing. If you export, prices are going to rise. We don't know to what level. So we will be impacted. There will be a threshold where prices will rise. Like yesterday, I'm hearing J.P. Morgan said prices in 2017 are going to rise somewhere between $6 and $8. That's
Two between $6 and $8.
between $6 and $8.
What do you think of that, Scott?
I know most of the mindset.
That's my go-to guy. For,
Yeah, most of the mindset of the independent producers. There's still a lot of companies out there that have nothing but natural gas, and they don't have plays like the Eagle Ford Bakken and the Spraberry Wolfcamp. And so my opinion is, except for the Marcellus, which is up to 12 BCF a day, and they're starting to have its own problems because they've exceeded the demand of the Northeast. And so today, some Marcellus gas is back down to $2. So producers are trying to decide, do I shut the rigs down? So it's starting to back up toward us here in Texas because the Marcellus is so big. But most producers, in my mind, beside the Marcellus, can make money, pretty good money, between $5 and $6. So the futures market may overcompensate, but what will happen in this industry, they'll start the rigs running again at 5. It may get up to 6 or 7. They'll fall back to 5. So I'm probably long-term in between. Once we start exporting, we're exporting 6 BCF a day and 4 BCF to Mexico in about 5 to 7 years, 6 BCF a day LNG or more, that prices are going to move around between 5 and 7 in this country.
As long as I've got you here, let me ask you a question that's slightly off topic, although you kind of brought it up. Why is it that the Northeast still relies on oil for heating and not natural gas?
It's a combination of it's where this country started. It's hard to put natural gas pipelines into homes that are 100, 200, 250 years old, that people are still remodeling and living in. It's making tremendous inroads into the Northeast, but I think over time, when you see it as cheap as it is, and the savings versus propane, for instance, it is much cheaper, and people are slowly making those conversions.
Robbie, we'll get to you, but I want to ask the audience if they have questions. I'm sure you do. So just raise your hand, and we'll send someone over with a microphone. If you don't even have to ask about exports. You've got a bunch of real experts here on policy and energy, and so ask whatever you want. I can't see anybody. Yes, there's somebody over here. Question?
Scott, you mentioned that the industry...
Oh, could you identify yourself?
Oh, John Royal with Gulf Publishing Company in Houston. Scott, you mentioned that the industry would be able to react to produce enough natural gas to push prices back down. But 5 years ago, about 80% of the rigs were, I believe, drilling for gas. Today, it's 80% are drilling for oil or crude. Can the industry react fast enough to produce the natural gas to meet increasing demand? In other words, won't you still be drilling for crude as well?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think the big challenge for the industry at that point in time is that if we increase the rig count 20, 30% to pick up this 6 to 8 BCF a day that's going out to Mexico and out to other countries, the industry will have to react fairly quickly, and the service side too. So there'll have to be a building of a lot more rigs, but it can be done. Look how fast we have taken the Marcellus in 4 years up to 12 BCF a day, how fast we've taken the Eagle Ford up to over 1 million barrels a day. So the industry can react fast. That's why you may see the price move up too high. It may move up to the 6, 7, 8 range initially because of the reason that you're saying. It's going to take us a good 1 to 3 years to react with more rigs, more capital. And so the price will overcorrect itself. It'll go higher than it should, and then it'll start coming back down toward the $5 range. That's the scenario I would expect it to happen.
Other questions? Yes, Diana. Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll get to Diana.
My question is for...
Identify yourself.
H.G. Copper.
I know who you are, but...
Oh, thank you. My question is for Ambassador Kirk. If U.S. becomes a net exporter of oil and gas, now what happens to the economy of some of these countries that are dependent on exporting their crude to the U.S.? I mean, would that send a shock, to the economy, that these economies are going to start having problems trying to survive?
So does everybody get that question? So what's going to happen to the exporters to the United States as a result of the United States becoming not dependent on them anymore? Could there be some kind of political shock there, right? Who was that addressed to? Ambassador Kirk.
My intuitive sense would obviously those economies would have to make some adjustment and either look at coming up with a more adaptive use for those exports, just as we have to creatively manage around the export limits on crude now that you heard Scott and Robbie talked about. But and I hope it doesn't sound too flippant, but given where we are with our economy and the need to grow jobs, I would still rather deal with the issue of producing a healthy balance that supports the kind of jobs that Scott and Kelsey are talking about, and let these other economies worry about that.
That's a good question for you, because you think about it. Let's say a country like Saudi Arabia, which has used a good deal of its oil wealth to, let me pick a judicious word, like mollify its citizens, and suddenly doesn't have that. It could ironically make the Middle East more volatile. You got countries like Nigeria. I don't know, do we import oil from Nigeria?
It's slowing down.
We do. Yeah, it's slowing down a little.
So it's not, this question of national security is not just simply making sure that America has enough natural resources. It's a complicated issue.
I think that's why we shouldn't be looking for energy independence, but we should be looking for energy security. That's why the security is a very important thing. The analogy I like to use, and this just shows you why humans are so limited and fallible, is listening to the complicated nature of where these pipelines are going. And look, 5 years ago we thought we were going to be importing more and more oil with declines going on. We were building LNG import facilities, and look where we are today. So I don't really know where we're going to be in 5 years. And the analogy I like to use is like a Rubik's Cube. So I don't know if people did this when they were younger, but I was very good at getting that one side good and correct. But once I went to that second side, it all got messed up on the first side. And my brother somehow read the book and got smart, and I cheated and would peel the stickers off and get the rest of the cube done.
Peel the stickers off.
But if you're not willing to peel the stickers off, you
I don't trust you at all.
So I don't know what it says about me. But the truth is that what's going on is so multi-party, both in the United States with these companies and then countries. And that's why I think you want the free market to work as much as it can, because it's going to be, it's these times and the permits and all these decisions. When we do something here, other countries are making decisions too, right? I mean, OPEC sits in a meeting and they say, well, the United States is coming on with all this oil. Geez, what are we going to do? Well, they're not going to invest the trillions and trillions of dollars they were planning to, because they're going to withhold some demand. So I just think that we need to be very, have a lot of humility about predicting what's going on and allow the market to work. And the only reason I make some type of a non-free market argument when it comes to oil is because, unfortunately, there's just not as much of a free market, because it's a global market with a cartel producing 45%. And then there's national oil companies that are making decisions like the decision you're making, which is my government budget requires me to have $95 oil in order to pay or mollify our people or whatever. And so there's different decisions. They're not like our companies who make profit and then invest it back into the business. They're actually investing in their social services and other things. So I think that that's the only reason that on the demand side we should have competition, because right now there's not a free market there, and allow the competition within different fuels. But other than that, we should have this free market, produce wherever we can, allow people to build their refineries, export when we can, understanding that if you believe in free market economics and Adam Smith, it's going to work itself out for the better for everyone.
Yeah. Let me also make the observation, though, that this isn't a zero-sum game, is that the United States is the only country that needs to import crude oil. If you look at the explosion, the growth of consumers in emerging markets, I mean, China, India, Brazil, parts of Africa, more and more of those are consumers, and the greatest need and challenge for those emerging markets as how they're going to build out their energy plan. So there will be other markets to absorb, I think, some of what might have previously come to the United States.
Actually, let's stick on this subject for just 1 second, and then we'll get to Diana Forchgott-Roth. Ambassador Gray, Boyden Gray, made the point in an earlier panel about the weakening of Russia's political hold on, especially on European countries, that would be the result of more natural gas flowing from other sources than Russia. And, you know, when I asked the panel, I mean, isn't that a good kind of geopolitical argument for more exports? Maybe I should ask you.
Well, my companies are in business. They're not in politics. And so they look at Europe companies as competitors. And so we're not anxious to use natural gas to, in essence...
So you'd rather have the Russians have a stranglehold?
Well, no, I mean, we're not...
Keep rationing out the prices.
No. I mean, I'm just getting... The reality is that we're in fierce competition, including with the Europeans.
Okay. Any other comments on Russia?
I mean, I agree. If you're exporting 6 BCF a day to Europe right now, it puts huge pressure on Gazprom. It puts Obama in a lot better pressure in dealing with Putin, for instance, what's been going on the last few weeks. We're asking the Japanese to back off Iranian crude. You know, to me, if we're asking them to back off Iranian crude, why not send them crude and LNG to solve their problems, energy problems?
Right.
Same with the Chinese.
Okay, Diana.
It seems as though we have so much shale gas, we're actually burning it off and wasting it. If you fly over North Dakota, you can actually just see where it's being burned as a candle, kind of like a candle. Is there any chance that the price of shale gas might actually go down a little bit with exports as companies invest in additional rigs, additional technology, and actually ramp up production, giving more stability to the price?
Yes.
On the what's happening is that the Bakken play started later. It didn't have the infrastructure in place to deal with the rapid expansion, and so it's taken a while for the pipelines to get built. They will eventually get built. What's kept the other areas we're talking about, like in South Texas or West Texas, most of the pipelines were already there. They've been there for 30, 40, 50 years. So you have essentially very little flaring of natural gas. What's happened, the reason everybody thought gas was going to come up to, most people on Wall Street thought gas was going to get up to $4.50 this year, $5 next year. The big surprise is all the gas coming from these oil plays. So I talked about these being oil plays, but there's a lot of natural gas. So gas production is up to 67 BCF a day. It's still growing because of the Marcellus and because of these liquid-rich plays. But it's growing very, very slowly. Gas demand is picking up significantly. And so I've expected to stay around 350. 350 is still very cheap. Most gas plays cannot make money at $3.50. So I would expect it to stay $3.50, $4 until we bring on some more of these LNG facilities.
But I don't understand the technical aspects of this, but Diana's question implies that you are, I use the word wasting, but you know that you, so when you're taking crude oil out,
yes,
you've got natural gas as well in the same well, right? In some cases.
Well, it's all being.
But do you keep it?
It's being split out.
Yeah.
So it all goes into a central facility. Mm-hmm. They sell the crude oil, they sell the NGLs, but they have to flare the dry gas because there's no pipelines to take it.
I see.
And so it's taking
the reason it's flared is because there are no pipelines.
There's no market there. I mean, there's no market. There's no pipelines to take it to market.
Right.
It's taken a long time to get the pipelines built, and they're being built now.
And you don't feel there are any there regulatory restrictions that are keeping pipelines, at least in the case of where you are, from being built? You're not. Are you affected?
There's very little land, federal land, and I don't know how much of it's federal land in North Dakota that's keeping the pipelines from coming to market quicker. But in Texas, there's much less federal land that we have to deal with.
And speaking of that, Kelsey or anyone else on the panel, what would be the effect of the Keystone XL pipeline on any of the discussion that we're having today?
Keystone, I believe it should be built, even though it competes with us. I mean, I would love it if they'd kill it, but but I can in good
And you would love
conscience
it
say
if they
that.
killed all these other
Exactly,
LNG terminals.
exactly. I mean, you know.
You're an honest man. You're never running
Yeah,
for office. That's
yeah,
for sure.
I will never run for office. That's a fact.
Competition.
But no, Keystone should be built. It's, I mean, it's just, you know, the thing about our industry is, and we're so good at this, and that's what people forget. Just look, go study the industry for the last 100 years. Give us a party and we'll screw it up. I mean, this is what we do, and we do it extremely well. We're producing natural gas from source rocks, previously thought to be non-commercial. This was not going to happen in anybody's lifetime. The magnitude of what we're sitting on is mind-boggling. But what we need to do, the best thing ever happened to the American consumer was for gas to be at a higher level and stay there for a period of time so these guys could develop what they developed. And we will do this again. I believe LNG exports will contribute to it. Other things will as well. But we will screw this party up. We'll glut the living heck out of it.
And you know, speaking of that, I mean, I think if there were a lot of sort of average Americans in this audience, and maybe there are, they would be asking, you're all above average, you're all different, but what they would be asking, well, you know, you guys are all talking about how we were energy independent, we've got all this oil and we've got all this natural gas. Well, why is the price of gasoline at the pump so high?
That was the point. I mean,
Well,
that's the point I'm making.
So
which is
why am I paying $4.50?
Because there's a global market out there, and there's global events. I mean, oil.
But we're adding to the oil in the global market.
Right, and then you have Syria, a problem in Syria. You have a problem in Libya. You have a problem in Nigeria. Saudi Arabia makes some. They're great now, like they're just flooding the market. But at some point, they could make some other decision. So you have it's not. People are sitting in a room and they literally come on television and they tell you, we believe the price should be this price. And I just think that, and then you heard the story about the refiners. I mean, Herb Kelleher, a good native of Dallas, always says it too. Like, he's on my board. He always says to me, right? So yes, they're buying it at a discount, but then it's being sold at the same, because there's a global price, and that, you know, there are little variations here and there. And so until you look at the demand side of the problem, we're always going to be dependent. Like, we're going around the world to be, you know, 1-800-CALL the U.S. military, even if we produce all the oil for ourselves. Look at Canada and Norway. They actually export oil. They are the nation we're talking about, and yet they pay the same price for oil and gasoline as we do, except, you know, adjusting for taxes, because they like to tax more. But, you know, if you look at that, it just shows you there is a global price. So I think that hopefully answers your question. And the Keystone Pipeline, to come back to that, I probably shouldn't touch it, but I will. I'll just say, it's like a classic example. Both parties are arguing about the wrong thing. It's like a side issue. I mean, Republicans believe, they'll argue there's going to be energy security and everything else, but like, as I've been arguing, it doesn't necessarily do that, but we should build it for sure. And then Democrats, you know, think this is going to help the environment, but truthfully, you know, they'll go to the East Coast, they'll go to the West Coast. It's the demand that
Help
they
the
want to
environment
solve.
not to build it.
They'll help the environment not to build it. So my point is like, they got to focus on the demand side as well as the supply side.
Okay, other questions, please.
There's a question right up there.
Okay, and there's one here and there's one there. We'll take this one.
Mike Orlando with Economic Advisors in University of Colorado, Denver. So a few of us were in this room for the coal regulation discussion, and I'll let Ray
More than a few.
More than a few. I'll let Ray McCormick correct me if I get this wrong, but what I recalled was coal-fired electricity becomes competitive at between $2.50 and $4.50 an MCF. So this is kind of a question for Paul, but anyone who wants to chime in. If that's the case, then what we'll see either is not a big increase in the price of electricity, but just an increase in coal-fired electrical generation, unless you want to fold in the conversations about regulations and limitations to coal capacity, which I know was in the paper today.
Yeah,
let's set that aside for half a second. My specific question was, what fraction of industrial demand for energy is electrical consumption versus gas as the commodity gas that goes into products? I'm kind of wondering, it helps, you know, I think it helps policymakers sort out. So should the next conversation be about how much do we regulate coal? Or should the next conversation, be about, well, don't worry about your prices going up very much because it's only 10% is really, do you really need gas in the form of gas? So I'm wondering, what is the breakout?
Does
Well, yeah, 30%, for the industrial sector, we consume 30% of the electricity, and we consume about 30% of the natural gas. And we are really concerned. We have some manufacturers.
Can I just interrupt? So 30% of the natural gas, partly through electricity and partly as feedstock, or is that 30% as feedstock plus whatever the electricity is?
The 30% of the U.S. gas is gas and feedstock. We're kind of lumping that together. We're 30% of the U.S. pie in consumption. And
You consume 30% of
the natural gas,
okay.
And we consume 30% of the electricity. This issue of coal-fired power generation is near and dear to us because we have some manufacturers that are natural gas intensive and then some that are electricity intensive. Recycled steel companies, for example, very intensive on the electricity side. A balanced supply of energy is critical, including coal, because coal does provide that ceiling so that when natural gas prices starts going up, it starts bumping into that BTU value of coal, and then it takes natural gas demand out of the equation. And that does help prices of electricity from going up more than it would otherwise.
Okay. Oh, I'm getting close to being over. I can't believe that. So maybe we'll just take one more question. There's one right there.
I'm going to try to stay away from the geopolitics part of this. David O'Brien with Bridge Energy Group. The thing that worries me is that in the first part of the last decade, natural gas was pretty cheap. Then it exploded, and we're trying to figure out how to site LNG to bring it in. Now it's cheap again. We're trying to site LNG to export it out. We're shutting down coal plants at a rapid rate. The answer to that problem, natural gas. We're not going to build new nukes. It's okay. We have natural gas. We want to lower our carbon footprint from transportation. We're going to put natural gas in the vehicles. If we want to lower our carbon footprint from space heating in the Northeast you mentioned, we could certainly benefit from that. That's natural gas. So it just strikes me at the end of the day, sooner or later, this price thing is going to turn based on that demand and that dynamic, and it's going to be an entirely different conversation, much shorter than we think. I'm curious what you think.
Okay, really quickly, I think Scott disagrees with that.
I think we should have a balance of all the various products. So whether it's oil, or whether it's gas, or whether it's renewables, I think we should have a balance and not rely just on one item on natural gas. The big unknown is whether or not it'll ever move into the trucking and the automobile industry in a big way. We as a company have already converted about 25% of our fleets already, of 1,000 vehicles, over 1,000 vehicles to CNG. We're filling up our vehicles for 50 cents a gallon. But we're able to put up the CNG stations right in the middle of the gas fields. Makes it very economical. In talking to a lot of the long-term trucking companies and the U.S. consumer, I just don't see them moving very fast into the gas demand side. Even though it's very economical, you just don't have you lose the horsepower. You got to fill up stations 10 times as much for long-haul trucking. It's just going to take a long time, even if the gas stays at $3.50, $4. It's good for the cities. They're moving fast. Gas demand's picking up. So I like the pace we're moving at. So hopefully we're not moving too fast and relying too much on natural gas. Then your scenario may play out.
But let me ask a question. But I don't think you're suggesting we shouldn't have a balance through regulation. We should have a balance through,
yes.
I mean,
Right.
and economics balance that. This is my belief. I mean, the consumer will consume the most economically favorable commodity. And by the way, I think this gentleman's absolutely correct. I think that we will see a price swing quicker than people think, right. And then we'll see it turn faster than I can go to the bank. So,
well, I think that's a great. I think that's a great way to end. Thank you. Thank you, panel. And now, before everybody gets up, so because I went over, which is highly unusual, you all have to be back really quickly, like 6 minutes, because President Bush is going to be speaking. So.